The ocean was calm that morning, the kind of stillness that made the villa feel like it was floating. I'd opened every window to let in the salt air, the rosemary and the quiet hum of gulls skimming the surf below. The table on the terrace was set with fig jam, a basket of warm bread, and the last of the lemons from the tree my husband planted 25 years ago. Elias arrived late, of course, with Melina offering one of her polished apologies as they stepped onto the tile. He couldn't find the car keys, she said, smiling just enough to not mean it. Behind them, Lourdes walked in, uninvited but not unannounced, carrying a bouquet I didn't need, and a bottle of wine too cheap for the occasion. We ate. We laughed in that polite, measured way that families sometimes do when love has calcified into habit. I noticed Elias wasn't drinking. He was watching me. After dessert, burnt sugar tart, my husband's old favorite, Elias pulled a manila folder from his leather bag and placed it beside my espresso. "It's nothing big," he said, casual. "Just precautionary. If anything ever happens and we need to act quickly. Emergency permissions, powers of attorney, you know." I opened the folder. The first pages were generic boilerplate. I've reviewed architectural contracts my whole life. I know filler when I see it. But near the back, something stopped me. My signature, on the bottom right of the final page. Crisp scanned slightly bolder than the text around it. I looked up. Elias was already speaking. "I asked Melina to pull it from one of the old files just in case you forgot. You've been tired lately." Melina didn't look at me. I nodded slowly and without another word signed the blank line beneath the scan. I could feel Lourdes watching me the way someone watches a guest who's stayed too long in their own home. They left an hour later. That night, I opened my wall safe and placed a new copy of the property deed beside my wedding ring and the original blueprints of this house. Then I locked it twice. The sea was still calm, but something had shifted under the floorboards. The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Thick cream paper embossed lettering, the kind of presentation reserved for wedding invitations or verdicts. The courier didn't meet my eyes, just asked for a signature and left. I sat down at the kitchen island, set the envelope beside my tea, and opened it with the same calm I used when slicing open utility bills. It took less than 10 seconds to understand what it was. Transfer of ownership. Effective immediately. Recipient Lourdes Duarte. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. But something behind my eyes pulled tight, like string wound too far. I called Elias. He answered on the second ring. "Mom," he said, neutral. I didn't say hello. "I just received papers about the house." A pause. "Then you weren't supposed to find out like that." I waited. He cleared his throat. "Look, you don't deserve it anymore. Not like this. You're alone. Lourdes is family now. She's done so much for us. Done what I asked." Another pause. Then Melina's voice joined from the background. "It's a gift of gratitude for everything she's done for us. She deserves peace. You'll understand eventually." I almost said her name, but instead I said, "How long have you known?" Elias exhaled through his nose. "We had to act quickly. Tax deadlines. Paperwork. You signed." I could still hear the surf out my window, but it felt far away. "You'll have 30 days to relocate," he added, businesslike. "It's all in the documents. You're evicting me. No one's evicting anyone. It's just transition." I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked to the linen closet, pulled out a spare set of sheets, and folded them tighter than necessary. The rhythm steadied me. 30 days. Not even a full month. Outside, the olive trees bent slightly in the wind, and for a moment, I wondered if they knew they no longer belonged to me either. I moved out without ceremony. No announcement, no shouting match, no dramatic scene to satisfy anyone's guilt. The movers came at sunrise, careful and quiet. By noon, the last box was loaded into a borrowed van. The place I rented sat 5 blocks from the beach, a narrow 2-bedroom apartment above a shuttered bookstore. The tile was chipped. The plumbing sang when I turned on the shower. I didn't care. It was mine. And it didn't know my name. The first night I lay on a mattress, still wrapped in plastic, and listened to the wind push against windows not designed to hold it back. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought of the curve of the villa's archways, the terracotta floor that caught morning light like fire, and the lavender I'd planted on the south wall. My husband, Hugo, had helped dig the foundation. He'd built the stone boundary wall himself, brick by careful brick. He used to joke that no one could get past it, that it would outlive both of us. I designed the house during my 3rd year in practice. It was my first personal project, every angle, every inch mine. I had drawn the plans at the dining table while Elias played with wooden blocks beside me. I paid the mortgage with client work, small grants and savings I never replaced. I turned down a job in Chicago because Elias wanted to stay close to his friends. I funded Melina's jewelry startup with a $25,000 check the same year I skipped my own trip to Prague. And then, during my 2nd round of chemo, I'd added a clause. A quiet legal footnote. Joint rights for Elias Bresson, contingent on survivorship or need. I wanted him to feel included, safe, empowered. Now I realized what I'd built. A beautiful structure, with a single unguarded door, and I'd left the key under the mat. It took less than a week. Lourdes draped herself across my former porch swing like she'd always belonged there. Photos surfaced online, her wearing linen and pearls, holding a glass of cava, smiling beneath the archway Hugo and I built on our anniversary. Finally, home, the caption read. Deserved peace. There was a charcuterie board spread across the table I'd sanded myself. A rented string trio played in the background. The olive trees were lit with fairy lights, cheap ones that blinked unevenly. She called it a reopening celebration. Elias stood at her side, looking proud. Melina posed in front of the fountain with 2 women I didn't recognize, her hand resting possessively on the stone rim. A neighbor from down the street, Clarice messaged me that night. Are you okay? We thought you'd passed away. Someone said the house was empty for months. I didn't reply. I simply stared at the screen, dead. That's what they were telling people. That I'd disappeared. Faded. Quietly erased. I didn't correct the rumor. Instead, I made tea, sat at my small second-hand table, and pulled out a yellow notepad. I wrote down dates. Transactions. The day I added the survivorship clause. The date I'd signed what Elias claimed were emergency documents. I searched property filings in the county database. Found the transfer date. Noticed the timestamp 2 days before I'd signed anything in person. They hadn't needed my hand. They already had my name. I reviewed every renovation permit Lourdes had filed, not many. But one caught my attention, an approved application for a new hot tub cut directly into the courtyard tile. No architect listed. No heritage compliance request. Interesting. At midnight, I found the original sketches I'd backed up. Timestamps intact. With them, the preservation covenant I'd filed 30 years ago. No material alterations without architect consent. I closed the laptop, folded my notes, poured another cup of tea. They'd turned my home into a stage, but they'd forgotten who built the theater. The message came just before dawn. Lourdes' payments overdue. They might seize the house. No greeting. No punctuation beyond what mattered. They might seize the house. I stared at the screen while the kettle hissed behind me. Another came moments later from Elias. A digital request through the bank app. 300, mortgage and penalties listed plainly. A line of notes below. Please cover just this month. We'll figure it out. That was the first time they'd reached out in over a month. Not to ask how I was. Not to apologize. Just to collect. I closed the app and opened my files. I'd been waiting, watching, learning. It didn't take long to find it one of the newer filings in the county ledger signed last fall. Elias had taken out a $200,000 line of credit against the house, collateralized with the villa's title, co-signed with my name. The signature wasn't forged with ink. No, it was cleaner than that. A scan of my old signature copied and pasted digitally. Exact curvature. Identical pressure point on the B in Bresson. He'd used me like a rubber stamp and defaulted. They hadn't told me because they were never going to. They didn't need me anymore until the bills caught up. I sipped my tea slowly, one hand steady on the table. They had made a monument out of betrayal, and now the cracks were showing in the foundation. The kettle clicked off behind me. I let it. I reopened the bank app, stared at the blinking notification and tapped decline. Then I typed back to Elias, ask the new owner. I didn't wait for a response. I knew it would come, and it did 5 minutes later. A call from Elias, then Lords, then Melina. I let them all ring. They'd taken my house, my name, my plans. Now they wanted shelter. But this time the storm wasn't mine to weather. City records hadn't changed much in 30 years. Same humming fluorescent lights. Same cracked linoleum floor that peeled near the back counter. I hadn't set foot inside since Hugo's funeral, when I updated the villa's sole ownership to my name. Elaine Martinez still worked the archives desk. We'd gone to school together, drafted side by side on mechanical tables before computers replaced our precision. When she saw me, she smiled gently. Looking for ghosts or ammunition? Maybe both, I said. It didn't take long to find it. Deed number 473 AB 221. Property 1920 Arenal View. Architect Eulalia M. Bresson. Filed July 18, 1995. Attached to it, buried under 4 tabs of legalese, was the covenant I'd added at the insistence of my mentor. No structural or aesthetic modifications exceeding 20 square feet shall be made to the property without signed consent from the original architect of record. Elaine raised an eyebrow. You filed that yourself? I nodded. Back when I still believed permanence existed. She made a copy. I had it notarized an hour later. Then I walked 2 blocks down to the county legal annex and submitted a formal injunction. Lords' hot tub wasn't just garish, it was illegal. So was the roof extension they'd added over the south patio. Within 72 hours, the villa's property file was flagged and frozen. It couldn't be sold, couldn't be refinanced, couldn't even be listed for short-term rental. Any transactions would trigger a title dispute, and they didn't have a leg to stand on. 3 days later, Elias sent a 1-line message. What did you do? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a fresh sketchbook that night, drew the outline of the villa from memory. The archway, the fountain, the windows that faced the sea. And in the corner where their hot tub now sat, I wrote Violation 37.2 SQFT. They thought signatures were just pen on paper, but I was the one who had drawn the lines. The invitation came from an old student of mine, now a curator for the Pacific Women in Design Forum. She'd remembered a lecture I gave years ago about architecture as legacy, how a home could carry not just shape and purpose, but intent. You don't owe anyone explanation, she said, just inspiration. I agreed to speak. The auditorium in Santa Clara was modest, intimate. Sunlight streamed through glass panels overhead. Most of the attendees were women in their 30s and 40s, faces sharp with ambition, notebooks open on their laps. I wore a gray blouse and soft-soled shoes. I carried nothing but a flash drive. When it was my turn, I stepped up and opened with a photograph not of the villa, but of a single arch. Sandstone hand-cut, catching the morning light. This, I said, was where I learned what betrayal looks like in architecture. I told them a story. A woman designs her dream home. builds it with love and labor. Years later, she becomes ill, and in a moment of weakness, she signs something small, something she believes will protect her son. Then one day, the locks change. The deed is no longer hers. The house she built becomes a stage for someone else's ego. But the woman, she does not scream. She does not beg. She watches. She documents. She waits. And when the time is right, she invokes a line no one remembered, one she wrote herself buried in the very bones of the house. The audience was silent. Then came the applause, measured, strong, unforced. From the corner of the room, I saw her, Melina, standing stiffly by the door. She left before I stepped down. Later that evening, I noticed a shift online. Subtle at first. A few comments beneath Lords' old party photo. Didn't she steal that place? I heard the architect sued them. She's speaking at the design forum next week. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. Some stories speak for themselves, and mine had just found its voice. The foreclosure notice was printed on cheap paper, but the ink carried weight. Public auction, 30 days. Final notice. The villa would be sold to the highest bidder unless the debt, now nearly $223,000, was paid in full. I didn't celebrate. I marked the date, circled the time, and said nothing to anyone. The auction was held in a low beige building behind the courthouse, in a room that smelled of damp paper and dust. I wore a scarf and sunglasses not out of vanity, but to become invisible. 3 other people showed up. 2 left early. The third man looked at the property file, furrowed his brow at the legal flags, and quietly backed away. The notary called out the opening bid twice. Silence. Any offer at all? I raised my hand. $1. She blinked. Excuse me, $1. There was no rule against it. No one else stepped forward. She glanced at her supervisor, then nodded. Sold. The moment was so small, so absurdly quiet that it almost didn't register. I signed the purchase slip with the same hand they once forged, and walked out with the deed folded in my coat pocket. Outside, the sky was gray and low. I felt neither triumph nor vengeance, only stillness. By the time I returned home, a message waited on my phone. Elias, you didn't have to go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time, then turned it face down and let it ring when he called again. He hadn't understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about precision. I wasn't reclaiming the house because I needed it. I reclaimed it because they believed I wouldn't. And in doing so, they exposed exactly who they were. I sat at my kitchen table, unfolded the deed again, and ran my fingers across the edge. Ownership. Not just in name, in blood, in blueprints. Tomorrow I would sign it over again, this time to someone who needed it more than I ever would. Lords disappeared the same week the article ran. It was a short piece in the local paper, just a column and a photo of the villa under morning light. The headline read, "Architect donates estate to shelter for financial abuse survivors." I didn't speak to the reporter. The nonprofit handled the details just as I'd asked. No spotlight, no interviews, just quiet reparation. By the following Monday, the villa was emptied of its pretensions. The gaudy chandeliers Lords had installed were removed. The courtyard was cleared. The hot tub drained and dismantled. In its place, bunk beds shared kitchens, counseling rooms, legal resource flyers pinned to clean bulletin boards. A real home again this time, for women who had nowhere else to go. Melina moved in with her sister in Santa Rosa. I heard through a friend of a friend. Apparently, she sold her car. Her jewelry business folded weeks ago. Elias stayed behind, buried in bills, untouchable by lenders and out of favor with nearly everyone he once called a friend. His face still looked like Hugo's, but his voice had changed. When he last left a voicemail, it cracked. I didn't listen past the first sentence. The letter from Melina came by post. Pale blue envelope. careful cursive. He cries. I think he finally understands. I hope you can find it in your heart to... I stopped reading. I folded the note and dropped it in the kitchen bin beside the empty tea bags. I wasn't angry. I wasn't moved. Understanding isn't redemption, and tears don't rebuild trust. I opened the French doors to let the afternoon light in. The air smelled of salt and distant rain. The villa was no longer mine, but its soul was intact again. That mattered more than vengeance. I picked up a calligraphy pen from my desk and added a final line to my notebook. Blueprints are just suggestions until the hand that drew them decides otherwise. Outside, a woman stepped through the villa gates for the first time. She carried nothing but a bag and a bruised sense of hope. That was enough. I named it Frame and Quiet. No signage. Just etched glass over an old brick doorway on a side street in Sausalito. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dried eucalyptus. I kept the lights warm, the walls soft gray, and the windows wide open to let in the sound of gulls and foghorns. It wasn't meant to be a business. Not really. Just a space. A place where young women could bring their sketches, their questions, their doubt. Some came with trembling hands. Others with voices already sharpened by too many rooms that hadn't listened. I poured mint tea from a chipped ceramic pot, offered red pencils, and told them the truth no one had told me at their age. You don't need permission to take up space. Most of them smiled. A few cried. All of them stayed. The work was quiet and unremarkable to anyone outside the circle. But every new line drawn, every floor plan, sketched with confidence, felt louder than applause. In the afternoons, I walked to the dock and watched the boats drift in and out of the harbor. One Thursday, as I returned with a fresh bundle of graph paper, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Voicemail. I didn't recognize the number until I heard the voice. Elias. Hi, Mama. He began hesitating already, unsure of what he had the right to say. I miss you. I know it's late. Maybe too late. But can we talk? He didn't cry. Not this time. I listened until the end. Then I pressed delete. No hesitation. No malice. Just stillness. There are some bridges that don't burn. They dissolve over time, over silence, over the slow unraveling of trust that no apology can stitch back together. I returned to the drafting table. One of the girls, Isla, was working on her first public space design, a pavilion for a women's shelter. I pointed to a curve she hadn't refined. Try softening this angle, I said. Make it breathe. She nodded and smiled. Outside, the sea moved like it always had. Steady. Certain. They thought I was just the name on the deed, but I was always the blueprint.